Welcome to the GCNTech Clinic, where we aim to answer your bike and tech related questions. As ever, you can submit your questions down below in the comment section using the hashtag AskGCNTech, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as possible. So without further ado, this week's first question.
Shall I hit us with it?
Yeah, do it.
This is from Dave Woodyat. He says, I was binging some old GCN videos recently and came across one of Ollie's epic rides. Rather than asking about his watts, he kept mentioning he was just trying to keep the chain tight as he rode. What's with the go with this? And now I'm missing out on some cheeky watts.
Yeah, so just all I'm talking about is, I think in that one, I think I said that in the Tour de Stations video.
Okay.
So what I was doing is basically just trying to keep the power on all the time, you know, on sort of flatter sections and slight downhill sections where you're riding at like zone 2 intensity.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, if they stop concentrating, they just kind of, I don't know, maybe
they back off the power.
They back off, or they start to freewheel. But by just keeping on that power at an intensity that is manageable for you indefinitely, which is what zone 2 should be if you're continuing to fuel, then you just go a lot faster and just maintain, you know,
keeping the chain
speed.
tight for me is a sort of cycling slang term for just keeping a bit of pressure on the pedals and keeping a bit of force through the chain.
Yeah.
You know, keeping it moving rather than just riding easy.
Yeah. Richard Burgess says, hey guys, love the channel. I own a Giant Defy with 11-speed Ultegra and an 1134 cassette, and a Giant Propel with 11-speed Ultegra 1128. I was wondering if I could swap the wheels over without having to swap the cassettes over. Would chain length be a problem?
Well, the honest, simple answer is yes, I think it would be a problem. There's quite a difference in the sizing of your cassette. Now, if you really, really don't want to swap your cassettes over, provided you don't use the big chain ring and the top half of the cassette, you would be okay with the chain length. But unless you can absolutely guarantee you're not going to use those gears, you might run into some issues with the mech being far too stretched. You could bend the mech hanger, damage the mech. Worst case, you'll rip the mech straight off.
Yeah.
So I would advise on taking the safer option, swapping your cassettes over. If you've got the tools and you've done it a couple of times, it's what, a couple of minute job?
Yeah.
Simple.
Or just if you want to put the bigger gears into your other bike, make sure you just fit a new chain.
Yeah. There you go.
Next question
is from Ken.
He says, I have Zip 303 Firecrest wheels onto which I've installed 28mm Conti GP5000 tyres. When I pump them up to about 60 psi, the tyre width increases to 30.1mm, very precise, even though they're 28mm tyres.
Is that normal? Yes. What you'll find is many modern wheels have a very wide internal diameter. Or width, sorry, which means as you put a slightly narrow tyre on, it almost like balloons out wider. And this is something manufacturers are starting to take into account when they're making their tyres now, to account for those wider internal rim widths. Therefore, in many modern tyres, when you'll get a 28mm tyre, if they've accounted for the wider wheels, it should measure up as a 28. Now, it's going to vary between lots of different brands of tyres, wheels, but it is fairly common to see. And it is something you need to take into consideration. Is it a problem? No, you just have to account for the fact that some tyres are going to measure up wider than what's written on the sidewall.
Yeah. What Alex said. Tomsky says, do you know of any bike or helmet manufacturer who's experimented with dimples? This used to be, you know, on golf balls, and apparently it allows air to travel close to the surface, creating less drag. So it's not about it's sort of traveling close to the surface. It's when air hits an object, you have a laminar flow, and then that laminar flow can then detach from the object, and that creates a bigger wake behind you. So what they want to do is make the airflow stick to the surface for longer, which then makes you have a smaller low pressure wake behind you. So you have less drag, less of that low pressure air. The smaller the low pressure area, the smaller the wake, the less you're sucked backwards into it, the less lower your drag, right?
Yeah.
So what happens by having trip strips on things, you can trip the boundary layer from laminar to turbulent flow, which causes it to stick on longer. And another way you can achieve this is through dimples.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a bike manufacturer called Heroin Bikes that had a dimpled effect on their frame that was supposed to do this, but again, like I mean, one of the reasons why bike manufacturers probably don't do it is because maybe it doesn't provide a huge benefit, and also
Certainly for the cost, I guess, of setting that up.
Yeah, for the cost of like implementing that's going to be quite expensive. So there's always a cost benefit analysis.
I've certainly never seen any bike helmets with that dimpled effect on them.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why it probably isn't beneficial is when you have your helmet, the airflow is usually pretty good at sticking to the helmet.
Yeah.
So the airflow does stay laminar and just sticks over the helmet. Usually it's when it gets onto your back, that's usually when you have the problem of the air detaching.
Okay.
And that's where fancy skin suits often come in. But also head position is key as well. It's easier to have that air remaining attached with a better head position.
Okay.
So probably that.
Okay, I'm glad we cleared that up. Next question is from /343. They say, hi, I'd like to know, is it possible to un-bonk yourself on a ride? I think it is. Yeah. If you fuel up and ride steady for a bit, make sure you get the energy back into your body. Over time, it will recover. It's not a great process to go through, and it feels pretty horrible, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think I've definitely bonked and then managed to stop at a cafe, had a good feed.
Yeah.
Had lots of tasty cakes.
Yeah.
And then, sort of 40 minutes later, sort of recovered a bit and good to go.
Yeah, you can do it. It's not pleasant, but everyone will be
Obviously,
okay.
you don't want it to happen in a race, but
Next question is from David Heathfield. They say, so maybe not tech, more of a training question. Would be better climbing out of the saddle? Well, so when you're climbing out of the saddle, would it be better, higher or lower head tube? Would being able to stand up straighter with a higher head tube help you recruit more muscles out of the saddle? Not thinking about aerodynamics, just muscle recruitment and power on steep climbs. I don't actually know the answer to that. You have any sort of thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, I always say that riding a bike is a fundamentally unnatural thing to do. We've never evolved to ride bikes. And so the way in which you can recruit your muscles and get power out is trainable, and humans are very adaptable and we can adapt to it. So I would say if you train in a lower position when you're out the saddle, you might be slower initially, but you will adapt to it. And then that will be beneficial because you will be faster and more aerodynamic.
Something we spoke about last couple of weeks back on the tech show actually was if you were to climb outdoors, out the saddle compared to seated, out the saddle would be 40 seconds slower.
Well, no,
it depends.
It depends. This is the thing. So if you're like really upright, you're going to be much more aerodynamic than if you're like out the saddle but hunched over and lower like feather. So the range is big, but he's not asking about aero, but I would say why not? Like, why not make yourself more aero and train yourself to be in a bit more of an aggressive out the saddle position?
Presumably you want to recruit the muscles to try and go faster.
Yeah, your body should be able to recruit them, you should be able to adapt to it. And a good example of this is, say, someone like Rowan Dennis is a great example. So a lot of people say that they produce less power in a TT bike position than they do on a road bike, right? Rowan Dennis is someone who does produce more power in a TT bike position than he does on a road bike position. And that's because he spent more time doing that, riding in that position. And so if whatever you train to, you'll adapt to.
That's a good point. I like that. Yeah. Okay, on to our last question for this week. It's from Roger Furness. He says, hi tech team. On the SRAM/Zip tyre pressure website, one of the questions is, what tyre casing do you have? You've got options of thin, standard, reinforced, downhill casing or double ply. What's the difference? And what should I choose as I run Pirelli race TLRs? So first thing that comes to my mind, we can rule out the downhill like double ply casing. We don't need that on road bikes. Thin options, I'd be thinking along the lines of an ultra lightweight, perhaps time trial based tyre. Standard, think of across the broad range of tyres that are available on the market, nothing exceptionally light and nothing super heavyweight. And in terms of reinforced, you're looking along the lines of winter tyres.
Yeah.
Something that's got a thicker tread, less supple casing, designed to be more puncture resistant. So judging by the tyres that you're suggesting you have, standard, yeah. Simple. Glad we've cleared that up. As I say every week, sorry if we didn't answer your questions, but you know what you need to do. Keep commenting them in the comment section down below. Hopefully in the coming weeks we'll pick them out and answer them as best we can.
Love you, bye.
See ya.